Hello everybody, this is Anna Abramowitz, and today I'm going to be talking about how to gather feedback, how to use that feedback strategically, and how to make sure that you're not overwhelming yourself and creating basically how to create situations where you get the feedback that you need for your interactive stories or your scenarios without overwhelming yourself or feeling like everything you did was wrong. All right, so before we do that, let me just make sure that I'm jumping on to all my channels so I can see everything. All right, just bear with me here, you guys. Thanks for your patience. And if you're seeing this live and you are visiting from a place that is not my room, then why don't you say where you're from and say hello? That'd be wonderful. And I'm just gonna make sure everybody's invited to these things and ready to go. Okay, sweet. All right, that's awesome. Cool. Hopefully this will show right now. Where are we? Cool. All right, I'm testing new things all the time because one of the things that I noticed is that there are some lags in the speech to speed ratio, and it affects your your experience. It also affects my experience because I can't see everything that you guys are saying. So, has this ever happened to you? You're in a room. You're like a learning designer, right? You're in a room, and one of the things that's happening to you is you are you're surrounded by people who are reviewing your project, right? And let's say we're not even talking at the project stage. We're talking about prototyping stage, right? They're giving you feedback. And you've got like the project manager, some subject matter experts, like you've decided to gather everybody into the room. And basically what happens is as they're going through and giving you feedback, everybody has an idea. Everybody has a suggestion on how to improve it. And then what happens is one person's suggestion leads to another person's suggestion. And basically you walk out of that meeting completely smothered with ideas and suggestions and blah, 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 blah. Like you're like completely overwhelmed. I've been in this type of cycle where one of the worst things that could really happen is the suggestion of one person triggers some sort of memory or idea from another person, and basically it snowballs into like 5 or 6 discussions where I've even had subject matter experts review my the prototypes, and they would give me they would have an argument in the feedback comments about who is right, without ever actually coming to a consensus and telling me what was the right answer, right? All of that, though, is a hard lesson, right? Painful lesson, but also something that almost I needed to go through to really see the value of finding a better way. Because the worst thing that could like ever happen to you is that you don't get a chance to improve on these processes, right? You don't get a chance to reflect and say, oh my gosh, I don't want to do this again. So, you do a bit of a post-mortem on some of these projects and you're like, okay, how can I do this better, right? And that's what I'm sharing with you right now is basically the culmination of me doing just a ton of post-mortems and going, there's something that's a common denominator here, and it's me. I wonder if there's something I could do to influence this this outcome a little bit better. Because let me tell you the truth. If every single time you have a project, there is the same kind of situation that you're in, or people are reacting the same way, or you're facing the same kind of difficulty, you might want to check that it's something that you're doing. You might be the cause. It's easy for us to be like, no, it's other people. I always get difficult SMEs. I always get terrible feedback. I always get this. Okay, well, if the conditions are changing and you're the constant, maybe the constant needs to be adjusted. And that's exactly what happened to me. I was like, maybe it's not all these people who are giving me all this feedback. Maybe it's not something that they're doing. Maybe it is actually something that I could do to influence that process. So there's 2 things I want to talk about today that are quite important. And if you can stick around for 5 minutes, then don't, because it's going to take a little bit longer than 5 minutes for me to explain this, all right? So the idea is that when you are taking feedback from people about your project, there's people who are credible sources of information and people who are not credible sources of information. I didn't come up with this process, or this idea. It's actually from Ray Dalio. His book, Principles, really talks about that. In their organization, what they do is they're like, okay, if you're going to give me feedback, I'm not just going to take, and this is kind of like the thing that I fell into, is like all feedback was equally valuable and useful and important. That is false. That is false. And it's not that you're not hearing people when they're giving you feedback, but some people are more qualified to give you feedback and advice than others, right? It's kind of like, are you going to take advice from, let's say, a doctor who smokes and is telling you how to be healthy? Probably not. He's not a credible source, even though he's a doctor, right? Are you going to take feedback from somebody who has had 4 divorces on relationships? Maybe not, but if you want advice on a divorce, you might want to talk to them, right? So what you need to do we need to do the same thing with our learning, right? If somebody's giving you design advice, right, you gotta say, is this person designed anything ever in their lives? Or are they on Pinterest looking at stuff and thinking that they're a designer, but they've never actually put together a palette for a wall or anything, right? They think they know stuff, but have they actually executed on those things? Are they a credible resource for you? And the thing is, a lot of people go, I know if I see something good, I'll know it. And I'm like, that's great, but that doesn't help me with design advice, because you have never actually put anything together. You're not a designer. So you have to look at people's credentials, experience. And when I say credentials, to me, credentials are not people who have pieces of paper on the wall, because to me that's not a credential. A credential is experience doing those things, not talking about those things, not pontificating about those things, not having a great personality. None of those things matter. None of those things matter. When it comes down, is the proof is in the pudding. Has this person done this work? Have they reflected on it? Do they have some valuable lessons that could influence the way that I'm designing my learning now? And one of the things that also happens is, so you're doing this analysis, right? Is this person who's giving me this feedback, are they a credible source of information? A person who is great at content subject matter, they might not be great at designing great learning experiences, because that's not their forte. It's your forte, right? So if they give you feedback about where the feedback should be, you might say, actually, the feedback should be at the very end, because I'm also reinforcing reflection. So we don't need to move anything right now. I've taken note of your input, great, but I know how this is supposed to be designed because I've seen this model work before. So that's how we're going to do it. Just make sure that the information is accurate though, and thank you for giving me that info. The other thing you have to consider after you've considered whether this person is credible to give you feedback, because you got to be analytical here, like you don't have time to waste, right? Is that one of the things that I kept on doing, which is kind of it's my own fault. I would bring people into these meetings, whether it's via virtually or in person, and I'd open up the floor to them. And the thing is, they want to be helpful to me, right? So what are they going to do? They're going to come up with stuff. They're going to come up with things to give me feedback on, even if they're not necessarily necessary to fix. One of the examples I had, which is just crazy, this is a real story. And it was about this painter who was commissioned to paint for he was one of those painters, and I don't remember where the story came from, but he painted these large commissions, huge oil paintings, right? And what happened is he was commissioned by, I think, one of those like big cruise lines to paint like an epic painting of people on a ship, them all taking off from like a dock, and basically like the first sailing, right? And they were going to use it in their ads. So they present that at one of these like big galas, and he unveils this painting that he's been working on, which is epically huge and detailed and everything. And then one of the like CEOs or something comes up and says, it's really good, but if we could you just take everybody's head and just turn it just a little bit, just turn it a little bit. And the guy who painted the picture went crazy, smashed the whole thing up and just walked out of there, right? And his colleague was like, why did you do that for? What is wrong with you? He's like, you don't present a perfect piece and then expect not to get feedback on it. You present a piece that has maybe 1 or 2 flaws so that people, when you are giving them the final product, they can notice those flaws. All you needed to do is put like a hairy arm on a lady and somebody would have caught that and be like, all right, we gave him something. Now, that's not to say that you have to, you're like, what's the lesson from there? Should I always give them a faulty product? No, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that even if you give people a perfect product, they will find things to give you feedback on it because they want to contribute. They want to feel valuable. So the idea is that if you want to control that situation a little bit better and get valuable feedback from credible people who are thinking about your project in the right way, then you don't open it up for everybody to give you feedback. And you've got to be very strategic with that. The other thing I suggest is you do this independently, because the worst thing, like I said, could happen is you have a whole bunch of people and they're like, yeah, but what about this? Yeah, but what about this? And it just becomes like a huge conversation that derails people from the main focus, right? And so, like I said, you don't need the project manager, let's say, who is just managing the project, or somebody else who's just let's say the admin assistant, to give you feedback on your storyboard. They're like, you need to have the end user give you feedback. You need the subject matter expert to verify. You need to do some testing yourself. But not everybody on the team needs to give you feedback on your prototype, as far as, because they're not your target end user, right? So be strategic with this. Feedback is okay. And if you're planning to get everybody to give you that feedback, then make sure you are evaluating that in context and acknowledging their contribution, because that's very important. You want to acknowledge that people took the time to do it, but also hold your ground, right? There's a reason you chose to do it this way. And also the other thing I always advise is you don't have to explain to everybody why you're doing the things you're doing. Sometimes all you have to do is say, thank you, that's a good suggestion, I've noted it. There, done. That's it. You don't need to be like, but the way I did it, you'd have 40 conversations about every single time you launch something, right? So you can be strategic with this. Now, this is the other thing that I really wanted to stress here, because as people send me their work, right? I'm working with people who are developing pieces for their portfolios. I'm working with people who are developing pieces for their organizations as well. And by the way, if you want to learn more about, how do you do great interactive stories, how do you work on projects that actually, you can actually put out there and people want more of, go to elearningsecrets.com. I have a in-depth webinar on how I got started and how I've used this framework to get me where I am today, which is a very awesome place, right, in e-learning, creatively and even professionally. So where was I? Yes. So as people send me their portfolios because they want to talk to me and see, basically I ask for people to send me their work if they want me to help them figure out, because I run strategy sessions, where they are at and if I can actually take them to the next level, right? So I like to see where people are at. And regardless of, where you're at, whether and which software you're using to actually craft your interactive stories or your demo pieces, one of the things that I found personally and from working with probably now thousands of people and subject matter experts, one of the things that I found is that you can't be complacent or lazy with the way you share your information with your subject matter expert. A lot of people will say, Articulate Review already has a really sweet review feature, which is amazing. But what they do is they just go publish to review, bloop, and it goes, right? If your interactive story has an intro, which it should, of course, setting up the scenes, setting up the character, and then it has a whole bunch of, decisions that somebody needs to make. For somebody to give feedback on that, and especially if somebody's trying to go through all of the options available, if you just published a single one lump sum project for them, after the first maybe 2 or 3 tries, they are going to hate you. Yeah, they are. Because you didn't optimize that for review. You didn't optimize it for their experience. And one of the things that I find also happens is that, you know, in the very beginning, one of the things, especially if you're starting to work with people who are trying to review your work, is you don't want to send them stuff that is like, you know, and this is the equivalent of it. Here is the movie Avatar. Okay, give me feedback. And they're like, what? Where do I start? Like, by the time they get to the 4th slide, they're going to hate you and they're going to be tired. So here's what I want you to consider next time you're doing your sharing your project with a subject matter expert, right? The intent is different. You got to be strategic. And in some cases, one of the best things to do is to shoot them a quick video about the vision, give them a walkthrough, a big picture overview, and then say, okay, and here's what I'm hoping you can give me. Here's what I want you to focus on. And even though you will tell them, you know, don't look at the images, don't look at this, don't look at the font, don't worry about that stuff, just worry about that. They will still look at all those other pieces, right? So how do you avoid that? You get rid of that stuff. In the review, when you're talking to the expert and you're verifying the quality of the information, minimize the design elements. Keep it scrappy, keep it ugly, right? This does lots of things for you. One of the things that it will do is it'll actually say, you know, as you improve it, that will be quite visible, right? Because you're like, oh, look, now we have pictures. My God, that's amazing, right? Awesome. The iteration will be there, but it'll also help them focus because they're human, right? They're human. They're like, I remember having this one session where I shared an image. I just had an avatar of like a person just as a placeholder. And let me tell you, I had a 30-minute, this was an hour and a half kind of meeting that I carved out. I actually had to do some serious travel for this meeting, and 30 minutes of that meeting was spent discussing the avatar and its appropriateness or not appropriateness for this audience. You don't want to add anything that will distract this person from giving you the info. So one thing is keep it minimalist. Like if you want them to review the text, don't add all this extra stuff, right? Validity, interaction, keep it simple, right? The other thing is break it up for them so that in the review or anywhere you have is include that ugly side menu, because it will help them go from scene to scene to scene without having to restart the whole thing. Because like I said, I've gone through so many demos where you have to go through the whole thing. And if I'm in a reviewer mode, that's not necessary for me and it'll frustrate me to no end. The worst thing you could happen is somebody begins your project, they really want to give you feedback, and then at the very end, the last few things, they're just so exhausted, they're not even giving you the feedback in the right way because they're just tired, they just want to get through it. So you want to make that experience as, you know, think about it from their point of view. They're now reviewing things. Make it as easy for them as possible, as accessible as possible. Set it up with a wicked video. Like one of the things you could do is I use Loom. I think it's loom.us. It's free. But just kind of like really sell them on this, like, and sell them on their participation. Like, thank you so much. This is so awesome. I really appreciate it. And here's where I'm looking. Your expertise will add so much here. Can you just review these? I want to make sure they're accurate. Like, you know, sell them on it. They're people. They emotionally, they're probably just exhausted. They're not in your project. If they enjoy themselves, they'll give you better insights because they'll want to help you. And the other thing is it won't be such a big burden on them the next time they have a project because they know you're considering their, you know, them, right? And the other thing is you're doing is really focus on where that person, what their strengths are, where can they play that they're within their zone of like expertise. And when you pull on that, you're not asking them to come up with situations because that might not be their expertise. They're practitioner, right? They're doing their thing. And one of the things that practitioners do really well and subject matter experts do really well is they can already look at a finished or draft product and be like, that's where this person made a mistake. They can critique something that's already been drafted, but to expect them to also come up with all this stuff, that's, for a lot of people, that's outside their zone of expertise. So just be aware of these things. There are people, they want to help you, but you have to help them help you as well, right? So I hope you found these these tips useful. They come from me, like I said, working with experts, my students working with experts, me learning from my students going, oh, did that work? No? Okay, cool. So if this is something you want to get really good at, collaborating with other people to craft scenarios, book a strategy session with me. I'll put the link underneath the video, and we can talk about, where you're at, where you want to take yourself. And I'll send you some awesome examples of the work that me and my students are putting together. And if you want to be a part of it, then we'll go from there. All right. So have a wicked weekend. I will see you this weekend anyways, because I do these all the time. But in the meantime, if you have questions, struggles, anything, put them in the comments. I review the comments. And if you enjoyed this, you found it valuable, do me a favor, help the algorithm push it up by liking it and sharing it. That would be awesome. And then obviously I'll see that you like this content, you like these kinds of real raw stories that I'm sharing from, from the front lines, and I'll share some more. All right. Take care, friends. Thanks so much for stopping by. I really appreciate your time. Have a wonderful weekend. Bye.